had a chance to review the minutes. I know Matt sent them out earlier today. I think we passed out a copy to everybody. If you want to take a minute just to go over that.
I had you in my contacts.
Sorry for all that late.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Liaison comments?
Just want to thank everybody for their service on this board. Unlike some boards that the county has, it's one of those that you don't get a pat on the back necessarily for serving from the community. You get more mudslinged at you than anything.
Incredulity also.
That's right. This topic is important to the commissioners and it's important to the county. So I appreciate those discussions and look forward to seeing you come down well.
Thanks.
That's it.
Public comment? Anybody have anything to say from the media? There we go. Anybody else here? I guess new business. Mr. Jones is here this evening to try to answer some legal questions the board might have before we decide if we proceed forward with asking or telling the board of commissioners to recommend or not recommend a noise ordinance. From what I've gathered, I think we want to know if something, if we were to come up with something that even be enforceable, just trying to keep in mind what our board members are thinking they would like to see, and maybe some questions as to what could be done and couldn't be done, so that then we know when we go to the board of commissioners, if they do ask us, you know, is it something we can actually achieve? Sure. That's spinning our wheels.
And Chris, I'm also going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Yeah, however you want to start it, that is fine. Obviously, dealing with noise is, people have different ideas about it, and I think there's good reason to have different ideas about it. Where people are living real close together, for example, noise is a much bigger issue than it is when people are not living real close together. There are some situations with noise that it probably doesn't matter where it occurs. It's probably offensive, obnoxious, and probably ought to be regulated. And then there are obviously much closer questions about whether something should or shouldn't be regulated. Of the various ways that I have seen to approach noise is you can either A, do nothing and leave folks that are suffering under noise or nuisance type problems to civil legal remedies that they may have in civil court, which from my perspective, if you got a particularly egregious situation that really should be addressed and probably should have the help, aid, and assistance of the government in addressing it, that's a pretty hollow situation for an individual who's having a real serious noise problem. And the best way for me to kind of give you an example of what's going through my mind when I say a serious noise problem, we had a complaint come to the Board of Commissioners, maybe 3 or 4 months back, where an individual apparently was at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning taking his stereo speakers, putting them out on his deck, not turning them toward his house where he could hear them, but turning them to the neighbors, cranking it up, and waking literally everybody in the neighborhood up.
And leaving town.
And I guess, most of us could probably agree that that really shouldn't be happening. That really shouldn't be happening. I think most of us could. And I certainly don't have a hard problem with saying that that shouldn't be happening. And if people can't be good neighbors and be respectful of one another, then I certainly don't have a problem with government coming in and helping them be a little better neighbors. Now, the flip side of that is you can, if you do nothing, they can bring a civil action to seek damages for that sort of conduct. They can also request a temporary restraining order from the court to immediately stop it, and they can also get a preliminary and/or permanent injunction if the court agrees that whatever they're doing is just intolerable and insufferable, and nobody should really have to put up with that. Now, every one of us, every citizen of this county has to put up with a certain amount of things that we necessarily don't necessarily enjoy having to put up with. That's just part of being a member of society. You can't always have it exactly your way all the time, and we have to put up with some things that we don't want to have to put up with from time to time. The question then becomes is, how bad does it have to get to where you should regulate it? And really, that's a legislative body such as the commissioners' responsibility to make that decision. And I think they have asked you to help them think through this process and make recommendations to them as to whether A, we should regulate this at all in Macon County, or B, if we decide we are going to regulate it, how should we go about it? I would say that first option is no regulation at all. We're leaving it to people to bring a lawsuit, get injunctive relief, recover damages. I would say to you that while on the surface maybe that sounds okay, in reality, for a lot of people it's a very hollow remedy, because you're going to have to hire an attorney to be successful with that kind of litigation. You're not going to have much success in most instances without an attorney. Depending on how serious that type of lawsuit is defended by the person who is causing the problem, you could be $5,000 or $10,000 into that before you figured out what was going to happen in that case pretty quickly. And so you could see if you've got somebody who's on a fixed income, you tell them that they've got to bring a lawsuit, hire a lawyer, and bring a lawsuit. You may be telling them, in effect, there's nothing they can do. And I'm not sure that's a good situation. For that one particular situation that we were talking about, the 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd venture to say probably anybody sitting in this room, if they got woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning with somebody blaring their stereo, you'd probably be a little bit ill, maybe a lot ill, and you'd probably be even more ill if you asked them to turn it down and they said not no, but heck no, and just kept on doing it. And I guess my thought is that this is a good inquiry to be made. Ultimately, it's a decision to be made by the board whether it needs to be done or not done. If you're going to regulate, the two ways that I've seen it approached, one is to have an ordinance that attempts to measure the amount of sound by way of taking decibel readings. And in some respects that I think can be a good approach. I think there's pros and cons with it. And another way that it can be approached is just to attempt to define the type of obnoxious noise, etc., that can be regulated and can be prosecuted, and do it that way, tying it in a sense to a community standard. And the courts have basically said you can do it either way. There's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way necessarily for doing it. I know, for example, the town of Highlands, I think they do it by way of a decibel reading, and they seem to be fairly pleased with their results. I think they've got some machines that they allow their police officers to use, and if there's a noise issue or what have you, police go out there and take a reading, and if it's over that level, I suspect they either A, get a warning, or B, get a citation of some variety to court. Downside of that, I had the good fortune of talking with Brian Welch. I hope you all know Brian. Brian is counsel to the Sheriff's Department, and he is probably a whole lot more sensitive to criminal law issues than I am. I don't do any practice in the criminal area, but Brian did bring what I thought might be a potentially important observation to make about regulating by decibel levels. He was a little bit concerned that, much like you see in DWI defense or DUI defense, attorneys saying, well, when was the last time you checked whether that piece of equipment was operating properly? Has it been checked in the last 6 months? How do you know it was operating properly on this occasion? How do you know it was getting a good reading? Also, the question is you know, you could potentially get bogged down in, was your officer properly trained in the use of that piece of equipment? Were they certified, et cetera, et cetera? So I appreciate Brian bringing those issues to my attention, and I think those are things that you need to think about. I think that the town of Highlands feels pretty confident, though, in what they've done. They have bought equipment, they have trained their people, and my understanding is it's been a very successful ordinance, at least within the confines of the town of Highlands. I talked with the county manager, and he was very pleased with how it was going up there, the use of it and the enforcement of it. So I wouldn't say that there's a right way or a wrong way. I will say I was asked by a county, not Macon County, to draft a proposed or a draft noise ordinance, and it was kind of interesting. The law enforcement there was particularly interested in not doing it by decibel levels. They really wanted to tie it more to community standards sort of thing, and so I did some research on it. I was a little worried about it being unconstitutionally vague and whether or not you could really do that. And our Court of Appeals said, yes, you can. And in fact, it was examining a noise ordinance from Jackson County, believe it or not. And it basically said Jackson County's noise ordinance was good, with the exception of one little tiny part that they said needed to come out of it, basically. And so, before this issue came up in Macon County, I was grappling with it a little bit for another county that asked me about it. And I looked at Haywood County's noise ordinance and Jackson County's noise ordinance, and looked at the body of case law in North Carolina on that. And I sort of plagiarized those two ordinances. I blended them a little bit, and I kind of took what I thought was the best of both of them, things that the Court of Appeals had, or the State Supreme Court had said this is good or this is not so good, and took all the good stuff out of both of those and put it together is what I did. So, and I've got that ordinance. It's never been adopted anywhere, but if it's something that y'all would be interested in looking at in part of this process, I can give you that. I've also got a copy of the Town of Highlands ordinance, and I think it would be good to maybe take a look at that. I don't know how far y'all are along in this process, but if you haven't looked at some ordinances, I would definitely look at the one that the Town of Highlands has. I think they basically are feeling real good about that ordinance and feel like they've been successful in addressing their noise issues with that ordinance. I will say, as you're doing this, I think it's extremely important that you, if you do an ordinance of any variety, I think it's great that you've got the sheriff here and the sheriff's counsel here, because in my opinion, that's the strongest part of any ordinance. Most people, I'm going to assume most people are fairly rational people, and probably, I would say a large part of these noise things are maybe parties and stuff that have kind of gotten out of control, and people weren't really thinking about as much noise, and it just takes a correction or somebody bringing something to their attention. There are some that are just saying, well, you can't do anything about it, so I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And those are the ones I think that you've got to probably, consider whether or not you need an ordinance for. I would say, what would you say, 75% or more, if they get hey, you're bothering your neighbor, will stop?
Honestly, Chester, and
Maybe
what
more.
I told this group is 9 out of 10 of them,
There you go.
those people that you go to and let them know there's a problem, that you're driving the neighbor crazy, they take care of it. And 9 out of 10 of them aren't those parties that you're talking about.
Really?
It's people, the ones that we're having the biggest complaint on are the people who are just maliciously, vindictively, are creating noise, driving their neighbors crazy.
So that's the calls you're getting.
That's the problem.
In other words,
the ones that are having the loud parties, you go and talk
call
to them.
from the neighbors.
Those are very small, but
Okay.
when we go out there and let them know, hey, you are disturbed, they're kind of embarrassed that they've done that,
Yeah.
and yeah, we'll turn it down. We didn't realize we were getting too loud.
Yeah.
Does that happen sometimes? Absolutely, sometimes. But 99% of the time, they turn their music down when they're asked once they've been warned.
Okay.
If I understood the chief correctly in the Highlands, they've not even had to issue the citations for it once they've had an ordinance and have been able to go to those people and say, hey, listen, you're violating the noise. Can you turn down the...
Well, and that was a conversation you and I and Brian had the other day, is I kind of felt like for most people, and again, I'm kind of assuming people are, for the most part, at least fairly rational. If you got somebody that shows up with a uniform and a badge on telling you you can either quiet it down or you're going to go down to jail with me, those are your choices. Most of us make that first choice to quiet it down.
And most people, like you said in that same meeting, I'd be embarrassed to know that I was disturbing my neighbors loud enough that you had to call 911, and I would correct it and remember that next time I had a get-together.
So, and that may be what they're experiencing mostly up in the town of Highlands right now, is a police officer being able to make that call with the backing of the ordinance, if he or she should need the backing of that ordinance to bring about a corrective result. But it seems to me that law enforcement being involved in that process is important. We also talked a little bit about the need to give the investigating officer, the arrested officer, investigating officer, he can arrest somebody on the spot if he's got what he considers to have probable cause. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, in his presence.
And then or if it happens in the presence, if the violation happens in the presence. Alternatively, you can have a situation where, for example, the neighbor is blasting the music and their neighbor calls Robbie to come out and deal with it. He tells the offended neighbor, I've called the police, they're going to be here in 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. And in the meantime, they shut it off. Well, of course, when the arresting officer gets out there, there is no probable cause. He hasn't observed anything that's wrong. And so he or she has to take the word of the person allegedly being offended. And
Well, actually, Chester, the person would have to go to the magistrate himself.
well, that's what I'm saying. He's taking their word as to whether or not he's going to even help them along in the process of doing a criminal prosecution. And in that situation, I think the officer that's investigating, he needs to be able to say, look, if you want to do something about this, get in your car, follow me down to the magistrate's office, and the magistrate's going to need to examine you about this situation under oath and find out whether or not he believes what you're saying constitutes probable cause and a criminal offense has been committed. And so, but I think that on the flip side of it, if the investigating officer goes out there and it's not only as bad as what it came across on the radio, but maybe twice as bad, you ought to be able to deal with that, and you ought to be able to deal with it on the spot. And so my thought is to draft the ordinance to where it's crystal clear that the investigating officer's got some latitude on how he thinks the prosecution should or should not be commenced.
The last meeting, Robbie, you explained, I don't have the vocabulary for it, but that you wanted to avoid your department having to carry the thing all the way through, that once you all had been out and, taken the complaint or whatever, you were thinking that the person should be able to carry it through. And that was one of the things we wanted to have you speak to.
And leaving it at the discretion of the officer to be able to do that, just like Chester sort of said the same thing just now, but he just said it in lawyer language. But
I mean, if you got an investigating officer that goes out there and he sees a particularly egregious, or she sees a particularly egregious situation, chances are he's not only going to be willing to follow it through, he's going to say, I've got an obligation, I feel like I've got a personal obligation to follow this thing through. Yet on the other hand, we live in a world where people don't always tell law enforcement the truth.
Right. Vindictiveness.
And there can be vindictiveness. You can have two neighbors that are fighting with one another, just don't get along with one another, and you can have a situation where somebody completely fabricates a complaint.
We have that
to law enforcement.
With DSS, it happens all the time. People will report something to an outside agency, and we have to investigate.
And in that situation, the investigating officer needs some discretion, needs some latitude, needs to have the ability to say, I didn't see a thing, the next door neighbor didn't see a thing, this neighbor didn't see a thing, this neighbor didn't see a thing, this neighbor didn't see a thing. The only two people that know anything about this are the one that's being accused and the one doing the accusing. And the officer sitting there saying, I got to make a case by beyond a reasonable doubt in order to get a conviction. And I think immediately that officer's thinking in their mind, I'm getting ready to waste a tremendous amount of time. If what comes up in evidence is these two people don't get along, they're constantly making stories up against one another, trying to get the other into trouble, there's just going to be a lot of waste of time. And I think what Robbie's saying in that situation, instead of getting so invested in it as the investigating officer, he says, I didn't see any of this, so I'm going to need your help. If you want to do something about this, you're going to need to follow me down. We're going to go talk to the magistrate. The magistrate's going to put your hand on the Bible and let you swear to the truth of what you just told me.
And the reality of it is, Susan, if we do it the other way, where just my officer issues a citation and then my officer and that suspect goes to court, and my officer sits there for 8 hours or 3 different days because it keeps getting continued, and then your victim, the person who was called in the complaint, doesn't come to court, then 9 times out of 10 it's going to be dismissed. So we want those people who are having an issue to be responsible for carrying it through. We don't want them to be anonymous.
You'll find out real quickly just how invested they are in getting something done. When they're asked to put their hand on the Bible and swear to something, they have to understand, I better be telling the truth, because if not, I could be prosecuted for perjury.
So it's basically that person going to the magistrate.
But after,
Either or.
Yeah.
Either my officer will issue the citation or they will go to the magistrate.
but of the 4 or 5 people that you said this actually affects every day, those 4 or 5 would probably go have it resolved. The other 90,
yeah, those 4 or 5, I can pretty well guarantee my officer's going to write a ticket the day after the ordinance goes into effect.
But it might resolve itself. I mean, the other 90% will take care of itself.
Correct.
And I would say this, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, I think y'all were incredibly wise to involve Robbie and Brian on the front end. Reality, any type of work is like this. In order for it to be effective, you need to have the chief law enforcement officer behind it and saying, yeah, you're doing it the right way. This is the way it needs, if you're going to do it, this is the way you need to do it. They've got real world experience. They understand the problems with prosecuting a case if you do it this way or if you do it this way. And they know the way to structure things to where the problems in prosecuting a case can be minimized. And so I would encourage you to listen loud, long, and often to what Robbie and Brian have to say as far as structuring any type of ordinance, if that's going to be your recommendation.
And one more step too, I think, is important to bring to the table. Our prosecutor.
Yes, by all means. I mean, it's extremely important to have not only law enforcement on board, but a prosecutor who has looked at your ordinance before it gets adopted and says, we can work with this. This one will work. We can do this. Or we would prefer to see you do it this way instead.
Otherwise, we're giving somebody power when they find out, well, your ordinance is no good, nobody will prosecute it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an ordinance that they either A, don't like using, or B, it's too cumbersome for them to use. Let's face it, if you got bank robbers, murderers, rapists, and people making a little noise, what do you think is going to get priority? Noise is going to be low on the list, I'm sorry to say. And so anything that you can do to help a prosecutor who's got more fish to fry than she has time to fry. The reality is, if we can help law enforcement and help the prosecutor do their job fairly and in a streamlined and an efficient way, I promise you, you're going to get better results under whatever ordinance you adopt. So that'd be just general thoughts. If there's questions or things that you would like to talk about.
The board have questions? Maybe some of the questions will get answered. Some of the stuff.
You mentioned something in this Haywood County, Clay County ordinance here that you didn't like in it. Can I ask what I have a copy of the Haywood County. That you take out of all.
Be candid, Peggy, it's been over a year since I worked on it, and I guess basically what I'm not sure there was necessarily anything that I disliked about either of them. The Court of Appeals disliked one little piece of the Jackson County ordinance, but if I'm recalling correctly, held the ordinance intact, just said they weren't going to enforce that piece of it. And it was something that was real easy to fix. And so as I was looking at those together, Chip Killian represents Haywood County, and I know Chip quite well and have an awful lot of confidence in his expertise, and if he's worked on something, pretty sure it's done and done very well. So I looked at it beside Jackson counties, and lo and behold, they were very similar.
So is Clay County.
The Clay counties doesn't exist yet. Clay's is just a draft. It's a figment of my imagination at this point. Something that I drafted.
But you drafted it at that time that you drafted it. You were well aware of Jackson County, Haywood, and
in fact, I consulted both of those in the process of it. I went to Jackson County because first I thought, here's a setting that's very similar. What works in Charlotte may or may not work here. I mean, do you want to regulate always decibel levels at a level to where you're going to get a call because somebody's out on a tractor in a hay rake putting up hay? Probably not. Probably
A lot
not.
of those ordinances exempted agriculture.
Some of those do. They do. You're exactly right.
Commercial
Yeah.
activities.
And I think you've got to be real careful if you're going to go with the decibel reading thing. You do need to understand there are things out there that all of us would agree that are very lawful and proper and probably shouldn't be regulated, but they might be making enough noise to be prosecuted under one of those ordinances.
I read Charlottesville came down here.
So the Jackson and the other western counties, they didn't use the decibel meter, right? They used
That's correct.
an excessive, you know,
And
extreme.
I didn't necessarily choose that form. It was chosen for me. They asked me to put together an ordinance in Clay County that did not use the decibel reading. And so that was the reason that I drafted it that way. And if y'all need me to get copies of that, I sent it to a couple of commissioners. Sounds like Peggy got one of them, maybe.
They gave them to us.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
We've all had
Okay,
copies of
good.
it.
If
Oh,
you
where
have,
that came from, Peggy?
You gave it to me.
if that has not been adopted yet,
No,
Peggy,
It's good though.
It's just been presented.
I like it.
It is very similar, very, very similar to both Jackson and Haywood. And all I've done is I've taken the benefit of a few appellate court decisions that have been that have come down since those other two ordinances were drafted that give us a little bit more guidance as to what we can and can't do and kind of incorporate some of that language.
I like this because it did refer to the statutes it came from.
But I will tell you, Robbie raised a question with me, which I thought was a legitimate, or maybe in Brian, I don't remember which, but we were talking about it the other day, and question became, I mean, you know, there are parts of the county, say, for example, a man or woman has 50 acres somewhere, and they've got a half a dozen hunting dogs or something out there, and as you know, sometimes those hunting dogs are prone to do a little barking, especially if a raccoon or something comes around in the middle of the night. That's a tough one. I mean, do you regulate that?
No way.
You know.
Well, didn't we sort of think that animal control animals wouldn't be included in a noise ordinance?
Well, they're going to be unless, or potentially going to be unless you exclude them. That was my point. Things that you find that may cause some noise, but you just don't think the county needs to get in the business of regulating that particular kind of noise, you might better give some thought to that and give some thought to excluding it. The law is forever changing and community standards are forever changing, albeit sometimes slow, but they do change. And things that we couldn't comprehend being prosecuted perhaps today might be regularly prosecuted in 10 years from now.
But if you have 6 dogs and 12 birds in a trailer within 50 feet of a house, which I have, not that I live in, but one of my rooms. And
Your birds and your dogs.
those birds and those dogs and this little woman, they bark all the time, and you cannot rent the house or get peace and quiet for the dogs and the birds.
Yeah.
I mean, you just find somebody.
And you know, that's the classic example of if you tell that next door neighbor that they're just going to have to bring a civil suit, chances are if they're, you know, renting, they may not have a big pile of money that they can go hire a lawyer with.
It's my rental,
Yeah.
and I don't have dogs or birds, but the neighbor does, and I have a hard time keeping them
I
raised.
got some extra chickens if you'd like.
They've got some chickens above them.
Chester,
But-
in regards to the process, and hopefully Ron and Brian can help me to answer this question. At the point that, leaving off how we're going to regulate, or
Yeah.
how we're going to determine whether it's a obnoxious noise or through a sound meter, but take me through the process of me thinking that noise coming from Peggy's is a violation. So I call call 911. They dispatch an officer out. Take the process from there, and particularly in regards to having the person who makes that call being involved in that process that Robbie is concerned about.
I will tell you how I would foresee it, but I think we need to extend the opportunity for Robbie to clarify or say, no, he got it wrong. This is what I would see happen. If a call came in for a situation like Peggy's, I think law enforcement here is going to probably, if there's something in effect that suggests that they can do something possibly about that, they're going to at least go out there and take a look about it and look at that situation. If they should arrive on the scene and those dogs and birds are going 90 miles a minute and the investigating officer is saying, this is a problem, chances are, this is the way I foresee it happening, and please correct me if you see it happening differently, Robert. I see the investigation officer knock on the door and say, look, I've been getting calls for 6 months or whatever about this problem, and we've got an ordinance now. And you're going to have to do something about this, or I'm going to cite you for violating this ordinance. And you need to understand these are the penalties for violating this ordinance. And at that particular point in time, based on the experience up in Highlands, what I'm hoping is going to happen is people are going to say, well, I'm not going to roll the dice about getting fined, or possibly having to go to jail over something I can't even stand myself,
In this, kind of fast forward, in this case, Peggy slammed the door and says, I could care less about the ordinance.
Well, I think the law enforcement officer at that point in time, if he or she feels particularly strong about whether or not they do or don't have a case because they sat there and listened to it, they might knock on that door again and slap some cuffs on her and take her, or take them on down to process them.
A citation would be issued at that point.
No, I think that they might be arrested and taken to jail.
You can either issue a citation or arrest somebody.
Okay.
Depends on what the officer wants to do and his cooperation.
Okay. Peggy being cooperative.
That's on any offense.
You're not going to lock her up. You're going to issue her a citation. Now, what's the process?
At that point in time, it'd be turned over to the district attorney's office for prosecution.
She would be given a court date. Court date would be set, and then on the day of the court, come 30 minutes before court starts, she would meet with the district attorney, talk to the district attorney about it, unless the district attorney calls prior to that, which they won't. There's just too many things on the calendar. Talk about their case, and then they'll either work something out there in court that day, or get a court-appointed attorney or hire an attorney.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sort of opportunities.
More the court system at that point.
When it goes to court, whenever it goes to trial, my officers will have to go to court every single time it goes to court.
That is correct.
And then they may have to sit there all day, and then at the end of the
How
day,
do we avoid that?
That's the nature of the business. It's just the nature of the business. That's correct.
It seemed like you had some particular concern about it.
There are some problems with that.
What I'm
My
hearing is,
cons- my
if we
concern
have
is
the
that-
ordinance, that's going to be
That's
one
gonna
of the
happen.
downsides of it.
Yeah.
It's a problem with any crime that
If
you
the board decides so.
are going to prosecute.
But is this only going to happen 5 times and then the story's done? I mean, then maybe every 6
Well,
months or every year you have somebody new roll into the system and becomes a
That's not
problem.
what all the incorporated noise.
Depends. And while we may not have a large volume of, for instance, the dogs, we may not have a large volume of dog calls right now for barking dog calls, but I guarantee you the moment you put a barking dog ordinance or barking dogs into the ordinance, our calls are going to go up by about 75% on dog calls.
Did I understand you to say last time, we were discussing possible, costs to the county and to your department of such an ordinance, and did you express the opinion that it could very likely, because of reducing all the return visits to the same people over and over and over, that it could actually possibly, be less expensive than what we're currently doing?
Well, that's hard to really say, because while we may not go to your house to deal with you 2 or 3 times, we still may have to go where we spend 5 minutes talking to you. We still may have to go to court and spend 3 days.
I think you've got several different type of people that law enforcement come in contact with. There's some that'd be like me, that if they came out there and said, Chester, you're making too much noise, you're disturbing your neighbors, I'm going to be so embarrassed. I'm going to go see my neighbor and apologize, and I'm going to take care of it right then and there, and that's the end of it. Then there are some that would say, Robbie, I'm going to do whatever I want to because you don't have ordinance.
Well, that woman who's been coming to the meetings, who you're out there all the time.
And then there's going to be, and then if you enact an ordinance, that person is who's been saying, I'm going to do what I want to, may not be so bold at that point in time. I'd say some percentage of people like that individual are going to say, do I want to roll the dice on the chance that I might end up spending a few nights in jail? There's going to be some that will say yes, and there's going to be some that will say no. But it sounds to me like, based on what I heard about Bill Harrell's experience up in Highlands, is having that ordinance to back up an officer to try to get people just to do the right thing has been a valuable thing.
I would say the reason that they established that ordinance is because they had a problem like we're having. And the fact that they haven't issued those citations tells me something. That they've been able to address it. We now have an ordinance, just like this guy with the lady that's here every meeting.
But you know as well as I do, there are some people who really don't care whether there's an ordinance, there's a law, a statute, or what. And you're going to have to deal with those people.
That's with anything.
Rob, if we passed an ordinance today, say we passed an ordinance, what's that guy going to do?
What's that guy going to do? I guarantee you, I feel very confident because I know him, I know his background. I feel very confident that he knows that I'm going to arrest him if he doesn't turn it down, and he will. I feel very confident.
He will turn it down.
I'm confident he will. I really am.
And
I know his history. I also know he's on probation.
And I'll tell you, people continue to defy the law in that situation. Chances are that's not going to be the only charge that they're going to get that evening. They're probably going to get a resist, delay, obstruct. And what else are they going to get, Robbie?
Drugs.
The
1% that we're talking about, they're not going to want to get arrested because, hey, if they get arrested, they're going to be violating the probation.
That's another point.
So that's going to take care of 99% of the 1%.
So just having an ordinance there is enough threat to them that they're going to have to cut it out.
If you end up going to court, we're talking about.
As long as you don't put too much to that ordinance, that's my fear.
Yeah, I think the key is finding the right balance in something that the community will support.
So, I got a question, Mr. Jones. For these people that are having these issues, just like this lady and her husband that comes in here at every meeting, other than the fact that she says she can't afford an attorney, is there a protection for her if she could get an attorney?
I think potentially yes.
So, and that's what I've been questioning through this whole time. We're talking about a civil matter, and we're going to turn it into a criminal matter, and we're going to tie up the sheriff's department, we're going to tie up the prosecutor, we're going to tie up everybody, and try to protect these people for a civil matter. And basically, we're going to tie up all county residents, their taxpayers' money, to try to resolve a very few cases.
I think there is, you brought attention to a very valid concern. You do need to define what the problem is that you're wanting to address. If you don't have but one problem in your county, and one problem alone, going to a great effort of passing an ordinance to deal with it might be overkill. I agree with that. The question is it one case or is it multiple cases? Jimmy, what would you say in the last 6-12 months? We've probably had, maybe 3 different visitors?
And we've had 2 different ones, 2 new ones here.
And how many of these do you get, Robbie?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but we told it. I had those numbers.
I don't know the extent of this problem. If it's a fairly large problem, I would say doing an ordinance is not an overreaction. If you got one isolated case, it may be an overreaction. I agree.
Well, the lady, one of the complaints when she was talking was this individual would get out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and ride a 4-wheeler up and down the road, in and out of properties and everything else. Well, after the meeting, I think it was, I asked the lady, I said, does the man own this property that he's riding on? And she said, no, he doesn't. And I said, well, why don't the landowner that don't approve of him riding the 4-wheeler in his property post the property? Well, guess what? That's what they did. I asked her at the last meeting, and she said, no, it hadn't been cranked since they posted the land.
Well, and that's a good point. If you can solve things without law enforcement, obviously that is definitely the best way to do it.
Right.
No question about it. I think that just encourages civility in our society when we learn how to get along with one another and respect one another.
What, I guess, stimulated, wasn't it, Mr. Tate, that several people showed up in commissioners' meetings just desperate about...
We had it 2 or 3 I can remember in the last 6 to 12 months with some particularly egregious situations. And I'll tell you, you tell somebody that's on a fixed income, retired fixed income, they're going to have to hire a lawyer and they're going to have to go to court in order to do something. They get pretty discouraged pretty quickly because they know that's not going to be a reality for them in many instances. And you got legal aid, for example, but I'll tell you, their funding has been so cut back over the last few years. They really have gotten to where, if you call them today, they will probably tell you what kind of cases they do and don't handle. And for the most part, I think they're handling things like domestic abuse cases and things like that. I don't know that they would even touch this type of a case, truthfully. I'd be surprised if they did.
Right. But this noise ordinance thing is a broad, just like Ms. Peggy here said, she's talking about dogs. Well, we're talking about not including dogs in the noise ordinance. Well, that's her problem. Well, then I may have some guy that shoots a gun continuous out there. Well, that's my problem. And so where do you how do you get the balance from the noises to protect all citizens when one thing that may be, Jimmy may be music to his ears, well, it may really bother me. We live right next to each other.
Well, and I guess to some degree that's kind of the reason I worked on that ordinance that I did for Clay County. Have you had a chance to look at that and read that off? It's kind of an interesting thing. I think if you read that thing, you would probably agree with me that if somebody violated that ordinance, they probably ought to be before the law. If you read it, they ought to be before the law. And I guess my answer ultimately is if the prosecutor and the law enforcement officer got it wrong and they shouldn't be before the law, there's a jury of 12 that can set them free. And if it happens that way, you'll not be bringing that case again, will you, Robbie?
Correct.
And I think the hope is that it acts primarily as a deterrent, so that it didn't...
That really is probably the lion's share of the ordinance. But I do not disagree with you that the threshold question should be asked, do we need an ordinance? Do we have enough of a problem that we need an ordinance? That's a very appropriate threshold question, absolutely.
Chester, it'd all be how it's wrote. How the ordinance wrote it. Say you don't exclude barking dogs or birds, but you add in excessive or malicious or
Let me give you something. For those of you that haven't,
add a few things to it, but then it becomes, a dog, somebody got a dog that barks 4 times a night, wouldn't make sense to be excessive. But one that barks all night long, then it becomes excessive or unreasonable.
yeah, I mean, this is the way this draft, definition, loud, raucous, and disturbing noise, any sound which, because of its volume, level, duration, and/or character, a noise disturbs, injures, or endangers the comfort, health, peace, and safety of a reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities. In other words, community standards. In other words, if 12 people in a box says nobody should have to endure this, then you violated this ordinance.
I mean, and with any ordinance, literally one word in an ordinance can change everything.
There's
One
no
word.
You're right. I think, and that's one thing that I kind of like about this is that language by and large came right out of Jackson County and Haywood County's ordinances. It's they've used it, they've prosecuted it, and it's gone to the State Court of Appeals. Jackson County had in this particular part of its appeals.
But should we, I would leave that about the dogs and the birds out if it was my vote, because why would I want Robbie's crew tied up out here with an 80-some-year-old woman over her pets making a racket when he could be out here stopping drugs?
Well, you're exactly right, and I think that's that's your point. I think in effect is look, and I think at some point you do have to recognize that every member of society is going to have to put up with some level of inconvenience from his or her neighbors. It's just, when you live 100 feet or 200 feet from somebody, your neighbor's going to do something that irritates you sometime, and guess what? It's not always illegal that they irritated you. But I think, hopefully we still live in a place where neighbors can be friendly towards one another and they can have those conversations and sensitize one another to issues and move on and not have problems in the future. Somehow I've managed to do that for 55 years. And, I don't think things are as kind and gentle as they were when I was a kid, but the reality is that there's still a lot of good people out there, and I think most people, I really do, try to be good neighbors to their neighbors. I do.
And please stay away from anonymous. I don't think anybody should be able to file a complaint anonymously.
Yeah, you got a major problem with that.
On this kind of situation.
You have no witness to the crime. You have no witness to the crime. So,
Any more
And
questions?
please consider the times.
So you're saying 9, even if, I know this woman who was here a bunch of times said he'll start up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, but you think it should be restricted to?
I hope that whatever, if you all come up with an ordinance, I hope it's a late night ordinance.
and really, that's what motivated this one. I can tell you exactly what motivated this one in Clay County is that there's a little bar and grill came up on the edge of town there in Hayesville, just outside of the regulatory authority of Hayesville, and they stay open until the wee hours and on the weekends, I think. And unfortunately, there's a little neighborhood that backs up right to the back of that little business, and those people just 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever it was, they just couldn't take it. They were still going pretty strong there at that little pub,
And it's tough as an elected official even to go to at least 3 different locations today, right now, and talk to people that have neighbors. I know you well enough to know how you would feel if your neighbor was taking stereo wire and speaker systems out to the end of his chicken house 50 feet away from your house, and then he was turning it up full blast rap music, filthy language music on his property, which he can legally do. and then getting in his car and leaving town. And
I mean,
playing that
it's
for
aggressive.
24 hours a day into your window where you're gonna be. You've got bonkers. And we've got 2 or 3 different locations that we have people that are actually doing things like that. And it's horrible to have to tell those people, I'm sorry, and I do it. I tell them, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to talk to the commissioners. There's no ordinance, there's nothing I can do. We can keep going back. And a lot of people, and even, well, a lot of people have said to me, well, sit up outside their house and harass them every time they move. Find a reason to pull them over and harass them. Well,
You'll be in trouble for that.
It's a violation of their rights, and we can't do that. But it's really disheartening when you feel for these people that, I mean, I've had them in tears. We've actually had one that worked for a local system here, a big local system, who actually have sold their house and have left the county because of their neighbor. And it's all over a dog. It's all over a dog that went down on the lower 40 acres and crossed the property line. And of course, their dog didn't read the no trespassing sign. So
Robbie, to kind of get a feel.
that's what
for-
created the getting even with them is because of that.
To help this group get a feel for the size of the problem in Macon County, it may be helpful for them to hear what portion of the complaints that y'all deal with are able to be addressed by just y'all going out and saying, can you quiet?
And we did that last month. We did
Have
that
you
last
already?
month.
Okay.
It's like 1% of the 1% is what we're talking
So
about.
you got,
It's a problem.
and that 1% of the 1%, that's 10 people?
It wasn't
It's
very.
in here. I thought it was wrong.
Yeah,
Calculation.
it was between like 12 and 14.
Yeah, right here it's talking about 518 calls for public disturbances.
But is that number growing, or is it staying about the same, Todd?
About the same.
Okay, so there's not a trend of it getting worse? It's about the same?
But at the disturbance level, there was many different disturbances, as Robbie.
Yeah, he put keywords into the query to find the percentage, less than 1% of 13,000 calls, a couple dozen.
We considered tarring and feathering, but that's kind of gone.
So you're talking-
Well, I didn't get the vote on that, Susie.
Neighbors been crushed.
You're gonna start going wrong.
This area where he lives in, I mean, I don't even know where the place is, but I mean, does it not have any type of
No.
HOA, any
No.
kind of, nothing?
And the 3 that I could name right now and drive you to them are in 3 different areas of the county. South, west, and east.
Well, the ideal situation,
One of
if
them's
you
a
decide
neighbor of
to,
mine. One of them, literally, I mean, it's not a neighbor that I hear it, but it's just right down the road from me. And it's driving the members of that community crazy. They will purposely leave the vehicle open with their stereo blasted all night long, go to town in the middle of the night, and purposely are driving their neighbors crazy.
But so these are neighborhoods then, so they're,
No, not all of them.
No, okay, so they're
this,
just-
when I say neighbors of mine,
yeah.
off LJ, so you know how close neighbors are on LJ, not very. And this person, the houses are pretty close together from, literally from right here to the sheriff's office next door.
Acre, half acre.
About an acre and a half difference, but she's going and putting the car right on the edge of her property and blasting it and doing all sorts of things.
And it's disturbing how many people?
At least, well, that's calling me at least 2 different neighbors.
Okay, so 2 people.
It's calling. So
That's
there's
calling.
a
Some
lot of
people
people that
won't
don't
call.
call.
Right, yeah. But that's what I'm,
A lot of people won't come to
But
the
if
county
it's-
commissioner meeting and stand up in public and complain. They'll call me at my house. I can come all day.
Well, I think the issue with the malicious type instances that go on is, while the number, no doubt, is very small, if you're on the receiving end of it, it's incredibly intense.
Right.
But I mean, let's get back to it. If you've got, say, 10 of these a year, is that too many, or?
I honestly couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I honestly don't know that.
Let's just say 10. I guess the question is, you count the cost to the county and versus the benefit to the county. That's what you
I
get.
would say most of that cost is already being spent for the ordinances that are on.
And that ordinance could be the thing that made it go away.
Maybe.
Well, it may make some people at least think twice about whether or not they're going to be unreasonable. You know, if you've had somebody complain to you, a neighbor complain to you, and then law enforcement comes out and they say you need to
And it's just like with
get it
any
down,
other.
then maybe you need to really start, maybe I'm wrong here, maybe I need to do
But
something.
leaving it at the discretion of the officer, you know, some people would say, I don't like that either, but leaving it at the discretion of the officer when they go to the call, if they can work it out with the officer, having a conversation with them.
I would be in strong
mandatory
support of that.
Citations.
I mean, I realize there may be some people saying that that's not necessarily a good thing. I think it's a great thing because we've sat here and a lot of the comments that I've heard have been about the very need to use discretion. You know, that we don't want to just blindly prosecute this or blindly prosecute that.
Just like
we
our
want
ordinance.
to use some common sense in the process.
We have an ordinance right now on alarm calls. We can issue citations for the false alarm calls that our officers respond to. Ask me how many times we've issued citations and sent them a bill. None. Usually if I've got the time to let them know that, hey, we responded to your house for the 3rd time in a row, they fix it. They call their alarm company and they address it with them and they fix it.
Well, I think another good point would be if an ordinance would help with Robbie's officers having to go. Right now, they go to the same places once a week or once a month, like the one probably
5
once
times
a
a
week,
day.
5 times a day. If you could stop that, then that's one aspect of him not having to waste that time, that fuel going down there, not time of 911 dispatchers taking that call 5 times a day. That's something that maybe is important, more, bigger emergency.
Plus, the victim is getting an answer to, so.
Those are some,
I think if you're not careful in a situation like this, if there is indeed community support for doing a noise ordinance and you fail to do it, you may be inadvertently undermining law enforcement's authority and their effectiveness in the community because people are saying, well, what's the point of me calling?
And the fact is, most things that are crimes happen to a very small number of people. And so we don't say, well, you have to take care of it yourself because, we only have so many rapes.
I don't know the full extent of this problem, but I will tell you there were some very impassioned pleas made to the commissioners. I do know that. And some strong cases made for there might be a need to do something.
And in fact, the lady that's always here, I don't think she came to the commissioner's meeting and complained. And she's very vocal about it. I mean, it's driving her and everybody that lives around her nuts. And she calls me a lot on the weekends.
But if you're going to do one, do it in a way, tailor it in a way to where you're giving people the benefit of the doubt and prosecuting only the egregious situations that we could all agree are egregious and something needs to be done.
And you'll have those people that will be mad they called in on Peggy because of her noise and law enforcement didn't give her a ticket. That will happen. And all that is those vindictive neighbors that are mad at each other. And we know that. And that's why I want to leave it at the discretion of the sheriff or the officer.
Well, I mean, if the officer goes out there and sees or hears nothing, then the officer is going to have the help and assistance of the person complaining in any event. Am I right, Ryan?
Will be taken through the dispatch office too. It might not be the right time of day. Or
I would go ahead and let the dispatcher relay it out because,
And then let the officer
yeah,
contact.
yeah, let the officer contact them. Don't put that off on the dispatchers. Yeah, because that happens sometimes now, and it really should be our call. And we never get the call because some people will say, well, there's no ordinance, so I didn't get to talk to a deputy. You know, no, there is no noise
But
ordinance.
you might not meet the regulation.
Right.
So by late night, do you mean midnight on? Are most of your problems during the late
Seven
night, or do
hours.
people also complain about daytime stuff?
I hope you go like 12 o'clock at night. If you're going to do it, I hope it's late at night.
What about 10?
I think that's too early.
Not at my house, my husband. He out He was the out shooting.
Why do you say that's too early?
I don't know.
I think he's trying to zero in on things that we can all agree are a problem.
Otherwise, on New Year's Eve, when somebody's having a big get-together at their house and playing music and having a big neighborhood
Going
party
back,
or whatever.
going back to what you referenced earlier, where they set the speakers out on the other side of the chicken house, I assume he did that during the day.
He did 24
Late.
hours and left.
So I've got to listen to that from making it up now, 2 o'clock in the afternoon when he set it up until the trigger time of 11
Or 12.
or
I
12.
wonder, could there be a phrase about, intentional?
You can guarantee we'll be sitting there waiting too if he does that. He doesn't start at 2 o'clock. We'll be waiting for 12:01.
The community standards part in this ordinance that I drafted for Clay County, that's in Jackson and Haywood, it may sound old, it may sound a little dated or whatnot, but it really, if you get right down to it and you start thinking about it, what they're saying is, if what's happening out there is violating community standards, then you got a problem.
Could you put something in about malicious and intentional? That, like mostly it has to do with after midnight, but that malicious and intentional, or
Prove it.
would that be?
It would be legal to do it. The problem is you just made the case astronomically more difficult for a prosecutor to prove intent and to prove
Well, I mean, like the
malice.
car driven over the property boundary and the owner's not even home. That seems pretty clear, but would it to a prosecutor?
I think, I guess what I'm saying is you've got a whole myriad of fact situations that you're
So
dealing
I can
with.
say I was doing that to keep the birds out of my son.
No, and there are some that are going to be pretty easy to prove intent, and some pretty easy to prove maliciousness. But I promise you that when people realize that that's an element, they're going to get real creative to mask their intent and real creative to mask their maliciousness. I promise you. And it's going to be a more difficult case to prove. Would you agree, Brian?
Yes.
So we've heard from the sheriff, we've heard from Mr. Jones. We've all had a lot of questions. A few months to think about this. I think as a board, we're about ready to decide if we think an ordinance is necessary, and then discuss the details of said ordinance. Once given direction, the commissioners to head down that road. And that would be the time, I think, to discuss the hours, the details, what's included, what's not included.
One thing you do have to be real careful about is content regulation. A lot of times it's, you can't regulate content. Okay?
So you can't say no obscene songs, like that, you mean?
Whatever the Supreme Court has said it's okay for people to say, and in the context, you can't regulate that.
Especially it's difficult on somebody's own property.
Okay, well, I think we need a motion and a decision of the board that that's the way we want to go, so that we can bring that to the commissioners if that's what the board wants to do. Does anybody have any thoughts to share or any additional questions or discussion about it that we haven't had?
No, I just think that, in which I'm not living through this, my officers are not out there. I'm not the one living by the noises, but I think the court system is in place. It's a civil matter, and I think we are, honestly, I think that we are trying to take care of a civil matter in a criminal way as a county-wide ordinance. And to me, I mean, after reviewing and hearing and everything else, the few people that's been here, I understand. I feel extremely bad for those people. But my biggest thing was, we talked about it in the last meeting, was whether or not there was protection in the civil court system for these cases. And there is. If this noise is happening in neighborhoods that are, when there's multiple neighbors that are being disturbed by these, then maybe they get together and pull some money together and hire legal representation and take it to civil court.
That is one solution. In fact, I had a case that Robbie's guys, I think, were involved in, where a couple of fellows, apparently, they get drinking in the late hours, and when they get to drinking, they get their guns out and start shooting all night long with their guns. And, you know the situation I'm talking about? And I had one of the individuals come to me and said, law enforcement says there's nothing to be done. What can I do? And I was advising the civil attorney. And I said, well, you know, you can sue them for a nuisance. I said, and I did exactly what you suggested. I said, it's going to cost you a bunch of money to do this. I said, how do your neighbors feel about it? How many of your neighbors are worked up over this? And I think you indicated about half a dozen or so. In any event, I suggested that they consider banding together to bring a private nuisance case. If they did, they ended up doing it for somebody else. I didn't hear back from them. So I must have quoted too high.
To present the other side of it, through talking with Sheriff Holland, there's a good chance that ordinance would actively to reduce the incidence of this kind of thing, that it would probably reduce the demands on the sheriff's department to deal with this kind of thing. And as you say, the standards of society. It wasn't too long ago that domestic abuse was considered a personal issue. You did not prosecute a man for smacking around his wife. And we got to the point that that was not acceptable behavior, and decided to let the community participate in regulating that. And I think these extreme cases of noise are, you know, something, it's a different thing. Right? It can become a community issue.
Well, there, another observation is, if you get, you can have a situation be so bad that it might actually provoke an otherwise law-abiding citizen to do something that he or she may not otherwise do.
And we have evidence from other areas that these ordinances have been effective in reducing the incidences, not just in prosecuting them, but in actually reducing.
Did the county commissioners task us with developing an ordinance, or did they task us with determining if we needed an ordinance?
It was a little vague at first. The final direction that we got at the meeting when we discussed the infrastructure was to determine if an ordinance was necessary to solve the problem, or if there were other tools in place that could be used in lieu of an ordinance.
And you're looking for a motion to that effect?
Yes.
To send back to the commissioner whether or not that there needs to be an ordinance, or if there's sufficient.
If there's other tools in place in lieu of an ordinance that this board would recommend that the citizens of Macon County use.
I'll make the motion that we send a recommendation to the county commissioners that Macon County needs a noise ordinance.
I'll second that.
Discussion?
I couldn't hear the motion.
I'm sorry. Will you repeat what you said?
I'll make the motion that we recommend at the planning board that Macon County needs a noise ordinance to the county commissioners. And then I guess at that time, then we'll,
If we're tasked to move forward,
if they
at
want
that
to.
time we can discuss the
Go
content.
forward, then we'll, get into.
What needs to
detail.
go in.
What needs to go in.
We're not, this motion doesn't have anything to do with content. This is just.
This is just doing, does the county as a whole need an ordinance?
My second.
So Carl second.
With our alternative, was that the only other means is with a civil.
Civil lawsuit, I mean, short of two neighbors being able to sit down, talk to each other and work it out, somehow I've managed to do that without fail for 55 years of my life. I've been able to do that.
Yeah, but that be the reason.
You're a good talker, Chester.
But it may not always work. You've got that, and you also have the ability to, if necessary, bring a civil action. It could be a relatively inexpensive thing if all you had to do is hire a lawyer to prepare a pleading and have them served, and the person said, by golly, they really were serious, and I don't want to have to hire a lawyer. I'll shut up and quit being a pain in the neck, and it might be ended right there. Or on the other hand, it may be one of these guys that are just going to keep on. And
What are the chances that the person that you would, the person, the guilty person, or the person that was
Accused.
accused, thank you, have the money to hire an attorney?
Chances are, if they don't, they're going to get a court-appointed attorney.
that's the bad thing about it well, no, they're not going to get a court-appointed attorney in civil.
Oh, correct.
They're not going to get one there.
Correct.
They will in a criminal case.
Correct.
So
Chances
have
are they
to hire
will.
representatives.
Yeah.
99.9% they will in criminal cases. I've never seen them turned down in criminal cases.
Do we have discussion?
Yeah, you can discuss.
I think that we really need to go ahead and present this to the commissioners that we need some type of ordinance before somebody gets hurt. Because a lot of these people are at the very end, and they're not going to go to a lot.
That's kind of what I'm worried about too, Penny.
I see too much of it.
Is, well, you've worked with real estate all your adult life. And you know that those types of things and problems over real estate can bring out the worst in people.
It's closed till they're going to start firing back. That's
But then, on the other side of that, Ms. Peggy, is now you have come forward and you have filed a complaint. You're out in the open that you're complaining against this neighbor. Well, now this neighbor's in trouble with the law. Is that not just going to heat him up? Is that not going to cause him to go over the other side?
the people that you deal with out here are not going to file. They don't know where to find a lawyer. They know nothing about it, just like the people that's talking here. They don't want to spend any money on it. They look for the sheriff's office to take care of it. We need to give them selective and be very cautious that we don't overload them any more than they are. But I feel like that we need to give them the right to get the protection from the sheriff's office before they take it into their own hands.
Right, I
Well, Mr. Jones, and you're dealing with these other counties that have the ordinances. They haven't
It'd be very
reported
selective.
increased violence because they now have this tool, right?
In candor, I haven't really dealt with those counties. What I did is I went and, of my own resourcefulness, secured their ordinances. And so I haven't really communicated. And I think the only information that we've got here before us this evening is Mr. Harrell's results up there in Highlands, and I understand it's right good.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion's good. Can we vote? All in favor? Opposed? All right, so
I thought you liked the Highland ordinance.
Doesn't affect me.
You're a little outside.
I'm way outside.
Commissioner Tate, can you get us on December's agenda?
Sure. Ron,
Thank you.
Mike,
Thank you.
Chester.
Thank you.
I'll dismiss myself here if y'all got
We're getting ready.
fish to
We're
burn.
getting ready to
I'll
dismiss
say
ourselves
thank you.
here in a minute.
Okay.
I talked to Derek this morning, and he's recommending that we do some sort of Christmas dinner. So I'm gonna work some details out, shoot some dates out, let you know something next couple of weeks. And then we'll schedule it.
So our next regular meeting will be December 18th at 4. And we'll have some details of that to follow.
One year we did a dinner with the commissioners, like evening meeting, all of us went to dinner and what, but I was.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
Thank you all.
And don't put them in the pants.
Sure.